The surveillance photo hit the desk like a verdict. My car, my license plate, my past crashing into my future. Professor Sterling slid it toward me with a smile that promised ruin. Fix my little accounting problem, or this goes to the police. My fingers trembled on the keyboard, the university's financial system glowing on the screen. One wrong move, and I'm not just expelled, I'm in handcuffs. The key card in my pocket burned like a secret. Too late to run, too dangerous to stay. The scent of stale Earl Grey and old parchment clung to the walls of Professor Sterling's office, a smell that usually signaled a quiet afternoon of academic debate. Today, however, the air felt brittle, like frozen glass ready to shatter. Arthur Sterling leaned across his massive mahogany desk, his shadow stretching over the brass lamp like a predator's wing. He didn't speak at first. Instead, he slid a glossy 4x6 photograph toward Caleb Miller. In the frozen frame, the rusted bumper of Caleb's Honda Civic lurched away from a crumpled bicycle. The taillights glowed like two angry embers against the midnight asphalt of a rain-slicked New England street. Caleb's throat tightened so hard, it felt like he'd swallowed a stone. He rubbed his damp palms against his denim thighs, the fabric rasping in the heavy silence. Outside, the university clock tower chimed 3 times, a deep, mournful sound that vibrated through the floorboards and into Caleb's marrow. Sterling tapped a manicured fingernail against the image. The click, click, click was rhythmic, almost musical. "It's a simple equation, Caleb," the professor said, his voice a smooth, predatory baritone. "You navigate the student records portal, authorize the grant transfers to the accounts I've flagged, and this stays between these 4 walls. Ethics are a luxury for people with clean records. Your card tells a different story." Caleb's hand went to his leg, his fingers tapping out a pattern of 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. He thought of his father, a man who had already lost everything once because of Caleb's technical oversight years ago. If this photo reached the police, his scholarship would vanish, and his father's remaining pension would be devoured by legal fees. "My father loses everything if I lose this chair," Caleb whispered, his voice cracking. Sterling leaned back, his leather chair creaking like a ship's hull. "Then ensure the numbers align, Mr. Miller. I need those transfers authorized by the end of the week. Consider it an extracurricular project in resource management." Caleb reached for the photo. His fingers brushed the cold, glossy surface, blurring the light reflecting off the chrome bumper. He tucked the evidence into his pocket, the sharp corner poking his skin through the fabric. He stood, his knees trembling, and turned toward the heavy oak door. Sterling's soft hum followed him out, a low, rhythmic vibration that echoed in his teeth. He didn't make it far. The hallway was a dim tunnel of gray stone and flickering fluorescent lights. As Caleb turned toward the north stairwell, a shadow detached itself from the wall. Before he could process the movement, a heavy hand gripped the collar of his hoodie and yanked him backward. Caleb's back hit the concrete wall with a thud that knocked the wind from his lungs. He looked up into the face of a man wearing a black tactical mask, the eyes behind the slits cold and predatory. It was a campus security guard. Caleb recognized the patch on the shoulder, but the posture was all wrong. This wasn't a man keeping the peace. This was a man enjoying a hunt. "The professor says you need a reminder about the stakes," the guard growled. The voice was muffled, but the threat was razor-sharp. He drove a fist into Caleb's stomach. The pain was a white-hot explosion that turned the world sideways. Caleb collapsed, his glasses skittering across the landing. He tasted copper, the sharp, metallic tang of blood. The guard reached down, grabbing Caleb by the hair to haul him up for another strike. In that moment of desperate proximity, Caleb's hand brushed against the guard's belt. He felt the cold, hard plastic of a high-level security keycard. His fingers acted on instinct, a muscle memory born of years of quick-fingered coding. He swiped the card, tucking it into his palm just as a second blow caught him in the ribs. The guard dropped him like a sack of grain. "Stay on mission, kid, or the next time we don't use hands." The heavy thud of boots retreated down the stairs, leaving Caleb alone in the echoing silence of the stairwell, clutching a piece of plastic that felt like a live wire. He waited until the ringing in his ears faded before crawling toward his glasses. His ribs screamed with every breath, a dull, throbbing ache that reminded him he was no longer just a student. He was a liability. He needed a way out. He needed a witness. He needed Emily. Caleb found Emily Vance in the back corner of the campus Starbucks, tucked away in a booth that smelled of burnt espresso and damp umbrellas. She looked up as he approached, her eyes widening at the bruise blooming along his jawline. "Caleb, what happened?" She stood up, her hand reaching out. But she stopped, apologizing to the chair she had nudged aside. Sorry. Caleb slid into the booth, his movements stiff. "I tried to fix it, Emily. I tried to hack the registrar's logs to see if I could find where Sterling was keeping the digital copies of that photo. But the firewall, it's like a wall of iron. I couldn't even get past the first gate." He leaned in, his voice dropping to a jagged whisper. "He's blackmailing me. He wants me to move money. Millions, Emily. University endowment funds." Emily didn't look shocked. She looked focused. She pulled a thick manila folder from her bag, the edges frayed. "Caleb, listen to me. I've been tracking budget leaks for the university daily. There are holes in the research grants, money vanishing into shell companies in the Caymans. I thought it was just administrative bloat. But if Sterling is the one pulling the trigger..." Caleb felt a flicker of hope, a small, warm light in the freezing dark of his panic. "You're already investigating this? If we pool what we have, if I can get into the system from the inside while you track the paper trail, we can bury him," Emily finished, her voice steady. She reached across the table and squeezed his hand. For the first time in 48 hours, Caleb's leg stopped its rhythmic tapping. He wasn't alone. They had a plan. They had the logic. And in Caleb's mind, logic was the only thing that couldn't be broken. Subverted. Caleb leaned back, the adrenaline of the alliance buzzing in his veins. "It makes sense," he said, his voice gaining a strength it hadn't possessed in Sterling's office. "You have the journalistic shield. If I provide the raw data, the logs, the transfer IDs, you can publish. Once it's in the daily, Sterling can't touch me. The publicity would make any move against me look like retaliation. It's the perfect failsafe." Emily nodded, her eyes bright with a shared purpose. "Exactly. I have a contact at the Boston Globe, too. If the story's big enough, we move it up the chain. We don't just stop Sterling, we clean out the whole department." She pulled out a small, high-capacity thumb drive. "Put everything here, every document, every threat. I'll keep it in the press room safe. It's the only place on campus security can't enter without a warrant." Caleb felt a wave of profound relief wash over him. His shoulders, which had been hiked up to his ears since the morning, finally dropped. This was the smart move. Emily was the best investigative mind on campus, and her father was a lawyer. She knew the protections, the protocols, the way to turn a secret into a weapon. He handed her the security key card he'd swiped from the guard. "This opens the restricted archives in the basement. Everything we need is in there." Emily smiled, a warm, reassuring expression that made Caleb feel like he could finally breathe. "I've got you, Caleb. Go get some sleep. I'll start cross-referencing these accounts tonight. We're going to win." Caleb walked out of the coffee shop, the cold night air feeling fresh instead of biting. He watched through the window as Emily tucked the drive and the keycard into her bag, her head bent over her notes. He felt a surge of gratitude. He had found the one person he could trust in a den of thieves. He walked 2 blocks toward his apartment, his mind already calculating the next steps. He reached for his phone to check the time, but as his fingers brushed the screen, he heard a faint click in the distance. He stopped. He turned back toward the Starbucks. He saw Emily standing by the curb, but she wasn't walking toward the library. A black town car pulled up, the kind the university administration used for VIPs. The back door opened, and Emily stepped inside without hesitation. Caleb's heart skipped a beat. Maybe it was a rideshare? No, the plates were government exempt. He felt a cold prickle dance across his skin. He began to run, keeping to the shadows of the ivy-covered stone walls. The car pulled into the private lot behind the dean's mansion. Caleb crept toward the low-slung windows of the dean's study. The glass was thick, but the lights were bright. Inside, he saw Emily. She wasn't being interrogated. She was sitting in a velvet armchair, sipping a glass of water. Dean Michael Davis stood by the fireplace, his heavy face illuminated by the flames. Then, the door opened, and Professor Sterling walked in. Caleb watched, paralyzed, as Emily reached into her bag. She didn't pull out her notes. She pulled out the thumb drive Caleb had just given her. She handed it directly to Sterling. The professor patted her on the cheek, a gesture of paternal pride, and Emily laughed. It wasn't the nervous, stuttering laugh she used in the library. It was sharp, confident, and cold. The realization hit Caleb like a physical blow to the solar plexus. The investigation, the budget leaks, the alliance. It was all a setup. Sterling hadn't just blackmailed him. He had surrounded him. Emily wasn't his savior. She was his handler. By trying to find an ally, Caleb had handed the only evidence of his innocence directly to the people who wanted to bury him. He was in a deeper hole than before, and now he had no one left to call. The world tilted. Caleb backed away from the window, his boots crunching on the frozen mulch. He had tried to be smart. He had tried to use the system, and the system had simply opened its mouth and swallowed him whole. He spent the rest of the night in a fever dream of paranoia. He used the key card, the real one he'd kept in his shoe, having given Emily a dummy card he'd found in the trash, to slip into the dean's office while the house was empty later that night. His heart hammered against his ribs like a trapped bird. The dean's office was a tomb of false comfort. A fireplace crackled, pushing the temperature to a sweltering 80 degrees. Caleb's sweat turned cold on his skin. He moved to the private vault hidden behind a portrait of the university's founder. He swiped the card. The heavy steel door hummed and swung open with a hiss of pressurized air. Inside were rows of black binders. Caleb pulled one at random. His eyes scanned the pages. It wasn't just Sterling. It was Davis. It was the Board of Trustees. The research grants were being funneled into a network of offshore accounts labeled Legacy Fund. He realized then that the hit and run wasn't the end goal. It was the leash. They needed a student with high-level access to authorize the final stage of the transfer. A $3 million grant that would effectively empty the university's emergency reserves. And they had chosen him because he was talented, desperate, and most importantly, disposable. The next morning, the sun rose over the campus like a pale, sickly eye. Caleb was sitting in the back of a lecture hall. His head throbbed. The room smelled of floor wax and old coffee. Sterling entered the room after the other students had left. He didn't go to the podium. He walked straight to Caleb's desk. "The clock is ticking, Caleb," he said, winding his silver pocket watch. Click, click, click. 24 hours, $3 million, or the police get a very interesting package on their doorstep. "I know about the legacy fund," Caleb said, his voice a low rasp. Sterling didn't flinch. He leaned in, the scent of his expensive cologne, sandalwood and sharp citrus, filling Caleb's lungs. "Knowledge is only power if you live long enough to use it. Right now you are a ghost in the machine. Make sure the transfer happens, or we'll make the ghost literal." Sterling walked away, the rhythmic strike of his heels on the hardwood floor sounding like a countdown. Caleb spent the afternoon in the basement of the computer lab. The air was thick with the hum of cooling fans and the smell of ozone. He sat at a terminal, his fingers flying across the keys. He wasn't authorizing the transfer. He was building a virus, a digital parasite that would latch onto the transfer and mirror it to every terminal on campus. But as he reached the final line of code, the screen flashed a violent, pulsing red. "Security breach. System lockdown initiated." Caleb froze. The high-pitched whine of a silent alarm began to vibrate in the floorboards. He had underestimated the university's firewall. It wasn't just a gate, it was a trap. He heard the heavy thud of boots in the hallway. Security. He yanked his drive from the port and bolted toward the back exit, slipping through the heavy steel doors just as the flashlights of the guards swept across his empty chair. He ran until his lungs burned, the cold air stinging his throat. When he finally reached his apartment, the door was standing wide open. The silence inside was heavier than any noise. Caleb stepped over the threshold, his hand trembling as he flipped the light switch. The place had been turned inside out. His books were shredded, his mattress sliced open, his clothes scattered like autumn leaves. But nothing was stolen. His TV was still there. His spare laptop sat untouched on the desk. Caleb walked to the center of the room. He picked up his phone. It felt heavier than usual. He pried the back cover off with a fingernail. Nestled next to the battery was a tiny, black disc. A transmitter. They weren't just watching him. They were listening. Every word he'd said to Emily, every plan they'd made, had been broadcast directly to Sterling's office. He felt a wave of nausea. He was a bug under a microscope, and Sterling was the one holding the scalpel. He grabbed his jacket and his bike, needing to get away from the walls that felt like they were closing in. He pedaled hard through the rain-slicked streets of the campus outskirts. The tires hissed against the black asphalt, a wet, persistent sound that masked the world around him. Suddenly, two twin beams of white light erupted in his rearview mirror. A black SUV roared up behind him, the engine a predatory growl. Caleb pedaled faster, his heart hammering in his throat. The SUV didn't pass. It swerved, the heavy bumper clipping the back of his bike. Caleb lost control. The world spun. Gray sky, black road, white lights. He hit the pavement hard, sliding across the wet grit. His bike was crushed under the SUV's wheels with a sickening crunch of metal. He lay in the ditch, the rain soaking through his clothes, gasping for air. His laptop, the one containing all his research on the legacy fund, lay 5 feet away, smashed into 1,000 pieces of plastic and glass. The SUV stopped. The driver didn't get out. He just sat there, the engine idling, the exhaust plume rising like a ghost in the rain. After a long, agonizing minute, the vehicle roared back to life and sped away into the darkness. Caleb crawled toward the wreckage of his laptop. He touched the shattered screen, the cold glass biting into his fingertips. He was broken. His evidence was gone. His allies were enemies. And the clock was still ticking. He spent the next hour walking, a ghost in a soaked hoodie, until he reached a small, nondescript house on the edge of town. A safe house Emily had mentioned once. He didn't expect to find her there, but as he approached the porch, the door swung open. Emily stood there, her face bruised, her lips split. She looked like she'd been through a war. "Caleb?" she whispered. "I'm so sorry." "I saw you," Caleb said, his voice flat. "I saw you at the dean's house." "They caught me, Caleb," she cried, stepping back to let him in. The room smelled of old wood and cheap coffee. "They found out I was digging. They told me if I didn't give them the drive, they'd kill my father. I had to play along. I had to make them think I was on their side." She pulled a crumpled piece of paper from her pocket. "I found this in the dean's trash while they were holding me. It's the original police report from your accident." Caleb took the paper. It was damp and stained with coffee, but the words were clear. "Investigation suspended per order of office of the provost." "Sterling isn't just a rogue," Emily said, her voice shaking. "He's the enforcer. The dean is the one who signed the order to bury your case. They've been protecting him so he could protect them." Caleb looked at the report, then at Emily. He wanted to believe her. He needed to believe her. But as he looked into her eyes, he saw the way she mirrored his posture, the way she leaned in as he leaned in. A journalist's trick, or a liar's. "We have to go to the gala," Caleb said, his voice hardening. "It's the only way." The Founders' Gala was an assault on the senses. The air was thick with the smell of expensive perfume and the sharp clinking of crystal. A massive chandelier hung from the ceiling, vibrating at a frequency that made Caleb's teeth ache. He was dressed in a borrowed tuxedo that felt like a costume. He moved through the crowd of donors and politicians, his eyes scanning for Sterling. He found the professor in the library, a room lined with ancient, leather-bound books and the sharp scent of formaldehyde from a specimen jar on the desk. "The final favor, Caleb," Sterling said, his voice a silk noose. "The dean has become a liability. He's greedy. He wants a larger share of the legacy fund. I need you to plant this drive in his computer. It contains enough evidence of embezzlement to sink him 10 times over. Do this, and the hit-and-run footage disappears forever." "You want me to frame the man who's protecting you?" Caleb asked. "I want to consolidate power," Sterling replied. "And you are the perfect tool, a student caught in the crossfire, the tragic hero who blew the whistle." Caleb took the drive. It felt heavy in his hand. He knew what he had to do. He waited until Sterling left. Then he moved toward the desk. He didn't plant the drive. He searched. He found it in a false bottom drawer of the desk. A physical ledger. Handwritten. Every cent, every transfer, every name. It was the one thing that couldn't be erased with a keystroke. Just as his fingers closed around the leather cover, the door clicked shut. Sterling stood there, his face a mask of cold fury. "I expected better of you, Caleb. Integrity is such a messy trait. Subverted." Sterling didn't wait. He lunged across the desk with a speed that defied his age. His hands, strong and calloused, slammed Caleb back against a bookshelf. A heavy volume of Milton's Paradise Lost fell, thumping against the floor. Sterling's fingers tightened around Caleb's throat. Caleb struggled, his vision blurring as the oxygen was cut off. He reached out blindly, his hand grazing the heavy glass award on the desk, a Professor of the Year trophy. He gripped the cold, sharp edge and swung with everything he had left. The glass connected with Sterling's temple with a sickening crack. The professor's grip slackened, his eyes rolling back as he slumped to the floor. Caleb stood over him, gasping for air, the ledger clutched to his chest. He had done it. He had the evidence. He had incapacitated the monster. He felt a surge of adrenaline, a moment of pure, unadulterated victory. He was the hero of his own story. He turned and bolted through the side door, slipping out into the night. He ran toward the gala's main hall, needing to find Emily, needing to find the police. He reached the edge of the fountain, the water splashing loudly in the cold air. He pulled the ledger out, ready to show the world. But as he opened the cover, he stopped. The pages weren't filled with numbers and names. They were filled with his own handwriting. "Dear Dad, I'm sorry about the server. I'm sorry I ruined everything." Caleb's heart stopped. He flipped through the pages. It wasn't a ledger of embezzlement. It was a collection of his own private journals, his own confessions of guilt and failure, stolen from his apartment weeks ago. He looked back toward the office. The lights were on. Sterling wasn't on the floor. He was standing by the window, holding a bloody handkerchief to his head. And he was smiling. Caleb looked down at his hands. They were covered in Sterling's blood. He looked at the ledger in his hand. The only physical evidence he had was a book that proved his own instability and a weapon he'd just used to assault a beloved faculty member. The struggle hadn't been an attempt to kill him. It had been an invitation. Sterling had wanted Caleb to strike him. He had wanted the physical evidence of Caleb's unprovoked violence. Caleb heard the sirens in the distance. They weren't coming for Sterling. They were coming for the deranged student who had just attacked a professor in a fit of academic pressure. By defending himself, Caleb had provided the final piece of evidence Sterling needed to destroy him. He wasn't the hero. He was the perfect scapegoat. He stood by the fountain, the cold rain washing the blood from his hands, realizing that every move he'd made to free himself had only tightened the knots. Emily appeared from the shadows of the colonnade. She didn't look at him with pity. She looked at him with a cold, professional detachment. She held a camera in her hand. "I got the shot, Caleb," she said. "The assault, the stolen book. It'll be the lead story tomorrow." "The hit and run," Caleb whispered. "It was all fake, wasn't it?" Emily nodded. "A remote-controlled car, a scrapyard shell. Sterling's been grooming you since your freshman year. He needed someone with your specific brand of guilt. You were so easy to break because you'd already broken yourself years ago." Caleb felt a strange sense of calm settle over him. The fear was gone, replaced by a cold, crystalline clarity. He looked at the gala, the lights, the laughter, the systemic rot hidden behind silk and stone. "Then let's finish it," he said. He didn't run. He didn't hide. He used the key card, the one he'd kept in his shoe, the one that opened the control room of the gala's massive audiovisual system. He slipped past the guards, his movements fluid and precise. He reached the terminal. His fingers moved across the keys, not with the frantic energy of a victim, but with the steady resolve of a man who had nothing left to lose. He bypassed the security lockout. He uploaded the audio he'd been recording on his phone since he entered Sterling's office. The confession, the threats, the cold, predatory logic of the legacy fund. Then, he hit enter. The massive jumbotrons in the ballroom flickered. The music died, replaced by the sound of Sterling's voice, amplified to a deafening roar. "Efficiency is the religion of the desperate, Caleb. I prefer resonance." The crowd went silent. The donors, the politicians, the dean. They all looked up as the digital ledger, the real one Caleb had found in the dean's own cloud backup while he was hacking the registrar, began to scroll across the screen. Caleb walked out onto the main stage. The spotlights hit him, blindingly white. He looked out at the sea of shocked faces. "My name is Caleb Miller," he said, his voice echoing through the hall. "And I am a thief. I helped these men steal from you. I hacked your records. I moved your money. And I did it because I was afraid." He looked directly at Sterling, who was being flanked by two men in dark suits. "Federal agents, not campus security." "But I'm not afraid anymore," Caleb said. "The accident was fake, but the fraud is real, and I'm going to prison for it. Are you?" The room erupted into chaos. Sterling tried to bolt, but the agents were faster. They tackled him to the ground, the silver pocket watch skittering across the marble floor with a final, metallic click. Caleb felt a hand on his shoulder. It was Robert Thompson, the man from the FBI. "You're a brave kid, Miller," Thompson said, his voice weary. "But you've still got a lot of paperwork to sign." Caleb nodded. He held out his hands. The cold metal of the handcuffs bit into his wrists, a physical sensation that felt like the first honest thing he'd touched in years. He looked at Emily. She was standing in the back of the room, her camera lowered. She looked small, alone, and terrified. She had the story of a lifetime, but she had lost the only person who had ever truly trusted her. As they led him out of the gala, Caleb looked up at the New England sky. The snow was beginning to fall, soft, white flakes that blurred the sharp edges of the Gothic stone. He sat in the back of the police cruiser, watching the campus fade into the distance. He thought of his father. He thought of the scholarship he'd lost. He thought of the years of his life he'd spent in a cage of his own making. But as the car pulled into the precinct, Caleb felt a profound sense of peace. The air in the cell was cold, and the smell of old tobacco was thick. But for the first time in 2 years, he could breathe. He watched the snow through the barred window, the white flakes dancing in the streetlights. He had lost everything, his career, his future, his freedom. But as he counted the patterns of the snow, 1, 2, 3, 4, he realized he had finally found his soul. And that was a logic that no one, not even Arthur Sterling, could ever debug. The end.